All right, good afternoon, folks. Colonel Kevin Osborne, PACAF Command Engineer, overseeing 6,000 engineers in the Indo-Pacific. Going to talk these next 50 minutes, talk about weaponizing construction in the Indo-Pacific. It's going to enhance those that sat in Admiral Killian, PAC Fleet's N46, enhance his discussion on what the Navy Seabees and NAV FACs doing along those lines as we work together jointly to try to set the theater faster that's out here. So I'm going to kick things off, set the stage. I got an expert panel here that basically explains how we're getting after weaponizing construction in the Pacific and our first test case on Tinian Island in the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas Islands. First, I want to say on behalf of Sharon Kroc, thanks for coming. Obviously, the key points here for Sammy JETC is, advance our skills, enrich your career, build those collaboration environments that are out there, and strengthen national security, because it's all about supporting the warfighter, much like Admiral Killian at the very end ended his discussion saying, hey, what you guys are doing is ensuring we have a safe and secure Indo-Pacific area and peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. But in the end, it's about igniting ideas. As you kind of see, artificial intelligence is big, and the Indo-Pacific are kind of the two big key topics for this discussion. Thus, PACAF, we actually was able to commandeer about 5 speaking parts today and tomorrow to kind of let you guys know what we've been working on for the last 3 years since we started working this wicket problem that's out here. Got a pretty much a good set of subject matter experts up here. So after I kick things off, I'm going to turn to Major General Tom Tickner, retired U.S. Army, who works in Woolport Federal Program there. He's going to explain how Woolport's actually kicked things off to help us on Tinian, going through the LiDAR examples and what their company has to offer. Then I'm going to Mr. Peter Senior, basically Senior Associate for Booz Allen Hamilton, to explain how he's getting after digital twins and basically how we digitalize the entire island of Tinian and how that's supporting our project management, and then taking the data of Woolport and overlaying it with Esri data and actually getting to next level final details that are out there. Major Ryan Hill, retired, works for Kimley Horn, using his experience at AFIT when he left there as a basic pavement expert and geotech. He's basically did along the test pits out there and is going to explain how we're informing the design using all the history there in the Japanese airfield and actually what's on the coral island that the Navy Seabees built back in 1944, which then feeds into Lieutenant Colonel retired Rick Sloop, who works for Fluor in Mission Solutions on basically the large contract we gave to AFCAP, about $410 million, to actually provide a service of asphalt through a mixed design to Captain Soren Hoffman, who was the 513th Expeditionary Red Horse Squadron for the 6-month deployment, just redeployed back to the 820th Red Horse Squadron in Nellis. He was the OIC on the ground when all this was happening, and he's going to tie it in basically how we are receiving that service from these 4 gentlemen and their companies to actually build a warfighting platform for the Theater Joint Forces Air Component Commander. With that being said, my background, anybody from Louisville, Kentucky in this room? All right, man, son of a gun. So it's nice to be back here. I joke 31 years ago today, I actually had my graduation ceremony in this exact same building when I graduated from a high school here local called St. X. Same thing when I gave my speech this morning at 7 o'clock. Nobody was from Louisville, so I didn't really necessarily, couldn't connect with anybody in the room. So, but I kind of joke around, basically Kentucky, when you come back to Louisville, it's great to be my hometown again. It's not Y2K, it's 5B2K. And basically it's all about the 5 Bs. It's basketball, it's baseball, Louisville Slugger, it's bluegrass, and that's not only the bluegrass, just the way the Appalachian Mountains gives off from a distance, it does look blue, but you got the banjo music. Just don't want anybody playing the So, and then you got the bourbon. Bourbon's very famous, basically similar off Scottish Scott whiskey that's out there, and it's basically the way the cave systems are built inside here. And then the Belle of Louisville. In the world, it's the oldest serving Mississippi steamboat in the world that's still operating since 1914, and it's the oldest one in America for a paddle wheel boat that you can actually still get tours on downtown in the Ohio River. Then you got beloved Colonel Sanders, Kentucky Fried Chicken out in Corbin, Kentucky, which was founded, and then you got the Kentucky Derby, obviously those that did watch the last 151 years of racing out there. Basically a sovereignty won, and it basically beat out journalism and this muddy track that was out there. So great to be back. Went to Air Force Academy, left here, graduated from St. X, worked at DET 290 and 295. So those ROTC folks out here, my first job was recruiting for Officer Training School, ROTC in the Academy. There's quite a few folks in our career field. Major General Tim Byers and General Fox were both graduates from the University of Kentucky. So there are 3 folks that still hold that, at least Kentuckians' pride alive that's out there. All right, this is the world as we know it. As you kind of look up there, when you Google Indo-Pacific, when you get inside and give me a map of that, this is what you see. So usually I'll go around the room, I'll look at folks, I'll be like, hey, Jeff, what do you see up here? I'll go back here and say, what do you see, Rebecca? And you'll see something. Maybe, I just got back from a trip to Australia. Maybe I just went down to Patagonia. Maybe I see Florida, I got a trip coming up for spring break. Myself, I just got back from the Philippines last week, first trip there, and been trying to get there for a year and a half, and toured about 6 locations up in the Luzon Peninsula. But this is what we know based on your demographics. your economic, your geographic background. If you flip the world upside down, it's the same landmass, same waterways, distances are still the same, but you have a different perspective on things. It's not the status quo out here. And you'll see things differently out here. And it's that cognitive diversity when you try to collect the neurons in the prefrontal cortex in your brain, and you start to see a problem set that you couldn't see before, and now it becomes quite clearer. Kentucky Derby throughout the years. So back in 1875 was the first race of the Kentucky Derby. A guy named, Merriwith Lewis Clark Jr., who was the grandson of the famed Lewis and Clark expedition that basically started in Louisville, Kentucky, went to St. Louis through the Arches, and basically found the Pacific way through the Northwest. He was basically born and raised here in Louisville. His mom died at a young age, and so basically then he had to live with his uncle and aunt, and that was the Churchill family. They owned 300 acres in what is now the area of Churchill Downs, which is what the town, the area actually horse racing is named after. He grew fond of horse racing at that time because the family he moved into, the Churchills, were big into horse racing, and he took a trip out to the Great Britain, England at the time, and went to an Epsom Derby around 1865. He enjoyed the Derby so much, he goes, you know what, I have a vision, I have a goal, and I want to take that vision, and I want to make Kentucky, in particular Louisville, the horse racing capital of the world. So taking that one golden nugget based on one trip that inspired him when he went to England in 1865, he basically drew and designed and had the very first Kentucky Derby of 15 horses, about 10,000 people in 1875 on the racetrack that we see today. The Twin Spires came along a little later, but not that much later. And obviously 151 years later, 2025, the first weekend in May is always the race, and it's basically the best 2 minutes in sports. So when I kind of look at that, obviously Merriwith Lewis and Clark Jr. had a vision, had a goal in May 1875 to present, still running. Your Air Force Engineers, back in World War II, was established in June of 1940. We were part of the U.S. Army Air Corps at the time, which then became the U.S. Army Air Services. We are older than the U.S. Navy Seabees, so I like to make that point clear because in March 1942, the Seabees were born, and as you heard Admiral Killian today, it was part of what happened on Wake Island that was out there, but we're about 18 months older than the Seabees. You can argue, well, you were part of the Air Force, or excuse me, the U.S. Army Air Forces, which is true, but in 1947, we became the U.S. Air Force Engineers. But we were basically built on a proud legacy and continue to engineer for the future that's out here. The very first EABs, Engineering Aviation Battalions, 12 of them were built World War II, and 7 December 1941, and those first 12 were in the Indo-Pacific, up in the Aleutian Islands, in the Philippines, and in Guam, and actually in Hawaii. And the cool thing is, I wouldn't say necessarily call it cool, but when the Empire of Japan attacked on 7 December 1941, the 804th Engineering Aviation Battalion was the first engineers to respond to start bringing back Wheeler Air Base and Fort Allen that was out there. So when I kind of think about asset management principles, you think about the best 2 minutes in sports, you know, us as an engineer, you think about, okay, how can I make that applicable to us? We're like, well, that's asset management principles. So you either have $1 or 1 minute to spend. So if I take the best 2 minutes in sport, and I take that 2 minutes and split it to 1 minute each, me as a PACAF command engineer who's got a warfighter mission, I'm going to spend it on two things. So one's infrastructure, and one's readiness. Getting things ready, getting those combat projection platforms ready, and make sure our airmen are ready to defend when our nation calls upon to act as required. And it's a whole of engineering approach because I need contractors, I need everybody to help us set the theater out there so that way, if conflict does occur, we are ready. Otherwise, we'd be caught on our heels. So with that being said, basically when I rolled out there in 2022, we were trying to figure out what the plan was for the Indo-Pacific. The planners had an idea where they want their planes to take off of, but as you know, you need your engineers, your infrastructure folks to build those combat projection platforms. So we went out to Tinian in 2022, as you can see on the right, that's what it looked like. One runway that was operational, C-130s would land on it. 2.5 of the other runways basically kind of overrun by the jungle. All the taxiways are gone, 269 keyholes. Because you can see on the left, it was the largest airfield in the world at that time with 269 B-29s. Those that don't understand the significance of Tinian, that's where the Enola Gay and boxcar took off from. That dropped Fat Man and Little Boy on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but they were launched from runway Able, that northern part runway upside there. As you can see, the little star in the middle is the same star that's in the upper right-hand corner, and it's the same star in the lower right-hand corner. The jungles out there are unbelievable. Most folks think the jungles to your knees or to your hips. They're 20, 25 feet tall, and some of these jungles have turned into trees, and those have overtaken the runways. The cool thing is, folks before me, a Colonel Dave Novi, who's now since retired, and I replaced him, and a Colonel Brad Buckles, who's still in the Air Force, working up at the Joint Staff. They were smart enough to dig into the NEPA guidance, the National Environmental Protection Agency, and they found a word in there. They said if we adaptively rehabilitate a runway, we can actually use O&M dollars, operational and maintenance dollars, $3,400 appropriation for the DoD, to actually restore runways. And as you know from the General Douglas MacArthur island hopping campaign, there's a ton of runways out there still left over from World War II. Jungle's taken them over, but when you get down in Union, you scrape away, you'll find some of that asphalt that's out there. And that's kind of a cool thing, definitely, that Ryan Hill, when he was out there, he brought back some chunks, and it's just interesting to see how they did their asphalt back in the days about 82 years ago that's out there. So that was basically our strategy, was take the adaptive rehabilitation, begin working, advocating for the resources out there through Air Force channels and Congress actually to get the funds to allow us to do what we're doing, to actually bridge that gap until MILCON gets there. Because MILCON, stateside's about 5 to 7 years. We're seeing Indo-Pacific is about 7 to 9 years. And we cannot get ready in time with MILCON, and we needed a bridging strategy. And thus was born the O&M strategy to bridge that gap until the MILCON can catch up here later in 2027 to 2030. So a good story here when you talk about collaborations. So basically Major General Hugh Casey, 1918, graduate from West Point, Air Force engineer, basically rolled into Corps of Engineers and basically went around the United States, get more into utilities, dams type of work. Did a lot of work up in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. He basically then, about early 1930s, he got called out to the Philippines, did a job out there, and as Admiral Killian mentioned this morning, he started understanding the area, not realizing that a war was brewing, and basically things would kick off on 7 December 1941, but he was building connections. He was understanding where to get the rebar, where to get the concrete, where to get the cement and the water. And he started building great relationships with the Philippines out there. He then got sent back to the States, did a project up around Pittsburgh. That's when he ran into an individual called Mr. Leif Sverdrup at the time. And he was basically a contractor working on the side, and they formed a great relationship there in the mid-1930s that actually will come to play later. I go back to Major General Hugh Casey. He gets called back out. Lieutenant Colonel Douglas MacArthur at the time. I got moved out to the Philippines. He wanted an engineer. He had established a rapport with Hugh Casey here, so he brought him back out. World War II kicks off as the Empire of Japan attacked multiple locations, either on 7 December or 8 December. They basically attacked from the Luzon Peninsula down, pushed them off the Bataan Peninsula. Douglas MacArthur jumped off, flew down to Australia. Your engineering and aviation battalions were the last one to leave the Bataan. 2 of the 3 companies got captured, and they were part of that famous Bataan Death March that actually went through the Philippines inside there. But your engineers were the last boots off the ground. Basically, they went down to Australia, initially landed in Kings River, went down to Melbourne, reestablished in Brisbane there, and basically ran the rest of the war for the Far East Air Forces out of Australia itself. Major General Hugh Casey, basically the bottom line, started working the game attack plan up through Papua New Guinea and up through the Philippines to kind of do a 2-pronged approach. General Douglas MacArthur at the time said, hey, could you use some help? He goes, by God, I could. Who would you like to call up? And he goes, hey, I can use Mr. Leif Sverdrup. So they called him up. Mr. Leif Sverdrup had already gotten a contract about 1939, 1940 to start working an island hopping campaign. When you look up the right-hand corner, you see the red line where the Empire of Japan got pushed pretty far past Wake Island and Midway. He started looking down the Christmas Islands, down to Fiji, Tarawa, and come up down through Papua New Guinea that way. So as a contractor, he basically bought a cruise ship, and he actually had his contractor workers and ran his office out of a cruise ship, and he went from island to island, and he basically started building 7,000-foot runways using those Marston planks, the pierced steel planks, getting ready for something that they knew was probably going to be coming. But kind of like we're doing now, we're setting the theater. They started setting the theater in 1939 through 1941 through contracts that the Corps of Engineers had given Mr. Leif Sverdrup. Fast forward to 1941, Hugh Casey calls him up. I can really use your help. They deputized him, made him a colonel. He came right into the U.S. Air Force, or U.S. Army Air Force at the time, and he worked the second campaign plan that kind of came up through Tarawan, Rota, basically Tinian, Saipan, and into Iwo Jima. And as the engineer, he started planning that and working closely with the planners. So the relationship that you talk about that we have here as industry and government together, it paid off later, getting to know your areas where they were able to prosecute the war in World War II. So all this kind of leads into the bottom slides before I get to the panel members to explain their individual pieces of how we're actually using Tinian as an example. It's basically getting after a whole of engineering, a whole of government, and a whole of industry approach. Using Tinian here, we basically, if you study the upper left-hand document, is a report that Major General Hugh Casey gave after World War II. It's an 8-volume book. It's about 500 pages. The very last volume 8's got a critique in it. It's 35 pages that provides a recap of all the challenges they had as engineers, logistics, organized training, and equipment during World War II. When you read it, you scratch your head and you're like, son of a gun, that applies today. So they talk about knowing history. It's kind of important. When you get down to the next article there, we're using AFCAP 5 contracts. We got 6 contractors up there now. We basically put a task order out for them to help us with Tinian. That initially was awarded to Fluor, which Mr. Sloot will talk about how Fluor is helping us set the theater there in Tinian. The next one is actually another great article that you can get on open source Google. It's the airfield construction units from the Royal Australian Air Force from World War II that explain all the challenges they had with logistics and engineering down in the land down under in Australia itself. And then those that know Dr. Ron Hartzer, our own AFCEC, AFCESA historian that has now since retired, he wrote a book on Air Force engineers from 1907 to 2012 that kind of explains the history. All that comes together is basically setting the stage that we got to understand where we were to understand where that we're going. We have that engineering kill chain. It's that planning, it's the program, it's the design, and it's a construction piece. That's where we fit into the warfighter presence. That is our kill chain that's inside there as engineers. And as we look up there in the upper right-hand corner, San Clemente Island, China Lake, it was brought up again on Airman Killian's talk this morning. That was the first kind of whole of engineering, whole of industry approach where we try to link in troop labor, i.e. the U.S. Navy Seabees, with industry to see what that looks like as we try to work them together. We've been studying those lessons learned to actually see how we can take that and either apply it to Tinian or future projects that are out there. China Lake was more of a mentorship program. They took a different twist. They went to San Clemente Island, which is about 80 miles off the California coast, and they basically built a ramp that's out there where basically the industry basically brought in the equipment and did the logistics, and then basically it was given as a service, and the CBs actually did most of the construction that's out there. Two different ways of how they got after the whole of engineering and whole of industry approach. But in the end, we need to weaponize construction in the Pacific, and basically we got to be ready at the speed of need and the speed of relevancy to be ready. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our panel members. We're going to kick it off with Tom here to kind of kick off to see how Woolport supports us with this.
All right. We have to borrow. Unless this works from the back of the room. You good? Okay, great. Awesome. So Tom Tickner, and I work for Woolport, which is an architectural engineering and geospatial company. I grew up in SAME over the years, or SAME, always thinking I would go to an AE company. And I ended up in a geospatial company, and that's what I'm going to talk about today here specifically. So one of my favorite jobs I ever had in the military, I was the Pacific Ocean Division Commander in Hawaii for 3 years back in 2017 to 20. And I wish I knew then what I know now with respect to geospatial, because I just never really played in that arena. I would order Buckeye all the time because people came to us and we wanted LiDAR, and I'd say, oh, go see the Buckeye person. We'll order Buckeye. And there's a lot of connection with our company to Buckeye. But the technology has advanced so much, so rapidly, that if you're not, especially in the Pacific, but anywhere in the world, if you're not looking at aerial LiDAR on remote islands, you're basically using, what World War II, they didn't have great maps back then. Some of the things still today are Captain Cook. And so that's still out there. And now the technology is where you can look through trees as you fly over it. And the most remarkable thing for me is also the depth we can get with aerial LiDAR in the water. 60 to 70 meters deep in clear water. So in the Pacific, we're getting really deep, which is great for operational reasons, but also planning, contested logistics, littorals, and all that. We can get into more of that if there's questions and answers here at the end. And I talked about the canopies. So with Tinian covered, with using aerial LiDAR and flying it from multiple angles, you can see through the canopy and pull out that information, really to get to engineer-grade LiDAR. You get much better detail if you go on the ground and use what a lot of companies have to do their the surveys, but for our purposes, it worked out great there. And if you're doing work in the Pacific, definitely we do a lot of work with PACAF, but if you're a company working in the Pacific, a lot of islands have already been flown, and we're continuing to fly that really for NGA, and it goes into GRID, which is their library of geospatial products. So your first question should be, hey, is there any information out there already? You could go there potentially through the services and pull that data and actually have a good head start on what you're trying to plan. So going back to the Pacific, and I've spent some time with PACAF, but also the other services there, and listening to where they are. And one of the number one campaign plans is, own the information. And so for a geospatial company, I'm like, oh, he's talking to me. We need to go out there and get a baseline of the entire Pacific in order to fight in the Pacific, because you're not going to be moving around too much, once things potentially kick off. And the idea is, we do enough there, like Tinian to make adversaries think twice. But whatever we're doing at Tinian and all these other locations, there's got to be really good plans in place. And we can talk more about that. What are we going to reveal and what are we going to conceal? What we're doing in Tinian is amazing with partners here in PACAF, and the world is watching that. And so it's a perfect reveal of what our capabilities are. And this gets back to places, not spaces. And so as we fly islands and give that data to NGA, and that data then goes to the services plus up to Indo-Pacom, and they use that data for their plans for infrastructure, like what are we going to put where and when, and if it's now with construction, troop construction, or if it's potentially a MILCOM project, or better yet, it's for future technologies and platforms that need to be delivered on remote islands to deny space that are temporary in nature. That's the kind of data that we're producing and working with the services in order to do it. And there's plenty of engineering that goes along with that, because you still have to plan to how to actually execute whatever it is you're going to put there, and then how you're going to do contested logistics, how we're going to move in the littoral zone and deliver and continue to deliver. And I'll pass it down here, but I guess the last thing, we had a lot of lessons learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. And some of that was not learned from World War II, because we went in there without the best data for mapping. And that's kind of how Buckeye grew, because Iraq just didn't have good maps. And so we just don't want to make that same mistake twice. And we're not. We're slowly mapping the Pacific. And quite frankly, my message is, in order to own the information, you got to map the Pacific, because that's the baseline. And my partners here are going to build upon that for us. So pass it on down.
Thanks. Yeah, I will say, as the self-proclaimed data dork, if you don't have an NGA grid account, highly recommend it. When we got access to that a few years ago, it was eye-opening to see how much data has already been captured out there in the theater. I want to thank Colonel Oz for having me out here. I've seen your speech, I think, 6 times now, and every time I see it, I learn more. You somehow evolve and get more information every time, so really enjoy getting to see those. My name is Peter Senior. I'm a senior associate with Booz Allen. I lead our digital transformation work in the Pacific in the installation and mission support arenas. I've had the opportunity to get to know Colonel Osborne for the last 2 years or so, since he kicked off the AFWORKS Challenge in the spring of 2023, I think is when it was. Getting to see those types of speeches and learn more about the challenge gave me an opportunity to really start to think about some of the digital technologies that Booz Allen's working on with DoD clients here at CONUS, and how we can adapt and rapidly deploy those to help with the set the theater and posture challenges that the Indo-Pacific presents. A couple of those solutions that we brought to Colonel Osborne about 18 months ago was the digital twins that we've been working on and building with Tyndall Air Force Base and AFCEC as part of the reconstruction efforts there, and another solution that we call Wizard, which focuses on civil engineer project construction data management. Being able to take something that had been tested and deployed for 3 years, CONUS has allowed us over the last 12 months to rapidly move out, and we're currently coming up on the end of a 12-month period of performance where we're delivering 5 digital twins of airfields in the second island chain. So Northwest Field on Guam, Tinian International, North Field on Tinian, Rota, and Saipan. And with the intent of supporting a lot of the planning that goes into the project lifecycle. Supporting our digital twin efforts is our Wizard capability, which is an AWS GovCloud deployed kind of knowledge management project planning capability that's really focused on a lot of the nuances that go into constructing projects in this part of the world. So you think about some of the environmental considerations. This part of the world provides a large UXO or MEC, unexploded ordnances types of challenges and tracking. Obviously, there's foreign governments, CNMI, local authorities that require coordination And so our efforts in Wizard have really been to help track the project lifecycle through the initial planning phases and be able to quickly report to senior leaders what the status of those projects are in the planning cycle and what potential risks that are out there. Complementing that capability, because we're going to consume data from Wizard into the digital twin, is our efforts to build out, leveraging the data that Woolpert had collected, build out 3D digital replicas of each one of these airfields with high level of fidelity and accuracy. You've seen multiple pictures to this point talking about the vegetation. I think that picture that's there on the top left probably does the best visual depiction of what LiDAR can do in some of these places. Interestingly enough, Woolpert was out there, I don't know, within the last 18 months doing data capture. That was at the initial parts of the weed whacking and jungle trimming that the engineers have been doing down there. And so through our contract, we actually went back down the first week of April and used drones to recapture the LiDAR data in order to track the clearing that had been done out there. So that picture on the top left, it came from that capture. You can see, it's hard to believe that all those keyholes, the 269 parking spots or whatever that previous slide said, they're really under there. And as you think through some of the environmental limitations and preserving the previous footprint and understanding where that stuff is, we've now been able to provide a pretty good site picture as part of that with the data between Woolpert's effort and ours. The top right, it purposely looks weird with the line going down the middle. I asked my team to show Northfield with two different tiles. The tile that would be kind of to the top left of that picture shows what it looks like when Woolpert went through and did the data capture. And the tile on the kind of bottom right shows you how much of the pavements have actually been cleared to date. But the important thing with these digital twins is we're able to get very detailed accuracy as far as where the footprint of those infrastructure projects are, what topography that's out there, really understanding what the impacts that the natural terrain provides when it comes to trying to plan new supporting projects that are out there, which could be pavements, could be K-span storage types of facilities, some instances, permanent fixed infrastructure, but really giving that site visibility without having to do site visits and go out there kind of with your machete and try to understand where this stuff is at. But as we get into kind of actually trying to transform, what is an operational plan, what is the 5 community trying to achieve with these locations, and how does that translate into infrastructure requirements? We've really been focused on not just providing that enterprise visibility through the digital twins, but also building out custom planning applications within the twins that can be used to do some of the initial project planning and kind of initial pre-design type of work. And so a couple of the capabilities that we specifically built for this project focus on things like explosive safety. There's different aircraft parking plans, there's hazardous cargo pad. Obviously, not a lot of these places have fixed MUNS munition storage, so there's temporary munition storage that are going to be planned. How does each one of those potential use cases impact where we site projects, where we put aircraft, where we look to extend aprons, or whatever it may be. And so that connected with our imaginary surface capability to where you can either look at imaginary surfaces, the surface clearances that are required for approach departure for the existing airfield. If you think about other airfields like Peleliu that are potentially need to be expanded or need some sort of upgrades, you can actually customize what that footprint or runway dimensions would look like and see what sort of imaginary surface and safety clearances that would generate. But ultimately, both of these capabilities combined with some of the other baseline digital twin capabilities that Booz Allen brought to this project are really intended to take some of that initial project concepts, help flesh out, a better plan, a more specific set of requirements. Because when you think about how far away these places are, getting construction materials, construction equipment out there is hard to do once your kind of initial volley has been made. And so if we can do, better planning activities associated with the projects as part of their life cycle up front, it should better seamlessly feed into the design processes associated with these projects with less risk of having to work backwards and potentially redo some of the planning work that was done up front. So with that, I'll pass it along.
Thanks. So I'm Ryan Hill. I'm with Kimley Horn. I'm our military aviation lead. And recently retired out of the U.S. Air Force. The first time I met Colonel Osborne was I was a major. I'd already pushed the button, and he was giving a brief at AFIT and pretty much fired up the entire audience. And I was looking around at my fellow Air Force civil engineers like, we're ready, right? We're all going out there, right? Let's go. Not knowing that a year later I'd be out there and we would be going, sir. So yeah, we had the great fortune of being able to do the geotech and pavement design and airfield, some of the airfield design support for PACAF, for the ECAG, and for the Red Horse unit that was out there. And we had the misfortune, though, of having a problem set that you can't see from the sky, right? And so understanding what was below the ground, to be able to understand what risks might come along with that, and then to develop a design based on all the geotech data that we would be collecting. And one of the key pieces is, as we look through that, and Colonel Osborne very well, and we've heard this a number of times, is kind of looking back in history, and that was a key component of this, was to understand what the Seabees had done to construct it, how it had been built, what resources, materials they'd used, and through all of that to use all that information. So we talk about getting data, and there is an absolute wealth of historical data out there from the record to be able to inform from the beginning what we thought we would go see when we got out there, and that helped us to inform PACAF and Red Horse so they could do some of their advanced planning on that. And throughout all of this, that really kind of became this theme as we looked at what the overall approach to how we would run the geotech and then be able to now drive the design was to find a balanced approach between, there are a lot of unknowns. You run 16 borings down an 8,500 foot long runway, and you hope that the profile that you find is probably, but I know as engineers, most folks, geotech is a bit of a mad science, and you're like, well, I don't know how valid that is. So for us, it was, how can we fill in some of those gaps in data and kind of help buy down some of that risk? And then what would be a reasonable approach when we find a 400-acre paved site, 400 acres of pavement, and then to help to develop an approach in the pavement design that would be constructible and be able to meet the needs in terms of timelines, and so kind of balance a reasonable amount of construction, and then to meet what the requirement is in terms of timeline, in terms of the actual structural support that's needed. Is this Chicago O'Hare, or is this a light and lean airfield designed to be able to support an agile combat employment type of environment? So using all of that, we go out and conduct a pretty comprehensive, you can see the geotech test plan out there. Anyone that's ever seen geotech, that is a ton of borings and a ton of test pits. So really great data, but in the end, all of it, though, is pretty well dispersed. And we're going to talk through how we filled in some of those gaps. But I will say the value, though, right off the bat that we found was that typically Air Force contingency engineering, you do some limited testing with a dynamic cone penetrometer to a 3/4 inch little rod that you stick in the ground and slam it down there and get a bunch of data back. Well, the initial results that that Red Horse and the CRG engineers had found was pretty decent material. And then as we actually got out there and did the geotech, we found not at all. And really not necessarily the quality of what had been done, but going back in the historical record and looking at photos of dump trucks full of less than man-sized boulders. It's literally you read Commodore Halloran, the report from how the Seabees built it, and they said we got rid of everything except for less than man-sized boulders, and we put it down on the surface. You can see they just dumped it out. And you look at the equipment list, and so that history helped to inform what we thought we would see, and then when we saw it, and you saw massive voids, and you could just pull out aggregate once we got down into test pits, and that helped to really frame out what we understood in terms of the risk to operations and what that material could or could not be used for structurally. And so again, driving through. So these geotech investigations, comprehensive across the site, getting good data, understanding the historical record, getting the test data, and then as we used geophysics and GPR, and we partnered with great firms like Collier Geophysics, and we're able to now fill in the gaps by doing a comprehensive GPR scan, and then now validate the layer profiles. And so what we've done is now created a 3D digital twin of the subsurface layers. And so now you've got a model below the surface to show here's where you're going to run into subgrade. Here's where you're going to run into this weathered limestone, these coral heads that are they look like teeth filled in with clay as cavities, right? There's these undulating layers. And so what's the risk to construction? What's the risk to Red Horse and their operations as they're trying to build this? And so by creating that subsurface digital twin, we're able to now drive, and we've been able to help to predict production, scheduling, estimating material, so how much material you're going to have to move, and then the really great part of this all is by knowing how what material the Seabees put down, and then seeing it in place, and then being able to estimate some of the quantities. being able to come up with a really innovative solution to actually recycle that material that the Seabees put down 80 years ago, cement stabilize it, and Red Horse putting it down, and now having a layer, a stabilized layer of 1945 material to be able to support a 2025 mission. So a pretty incredible effort, but really, again, driven by good historical data, good information, and then being able to create these kind of 3D profiles of the subsurface to help inform the design.
So Rick Sloop with Fluor. So the first time I kind of met Colonel Osborne, I think it was a high five or something like that. So I was a squadron commander at 554th Red Horse in Osan, Korea, and I had the task to move that unit to Guam, Northwest Field. And I think we had a paper napkin and said, here's what it needs to look like, and that's what we went after. So that was history, right? So I've been with Fluor for about 12 years. I am the expeditionary and logistics lead for sales lead. I am also the program manager for the Air Force Contract Augmentation Program, one of the 6 contractors. I can see some of my competimates here today. So all this great information came in, and we get an RFP, right? We hadn't seen it before. We hadn't seen a draft. It was, here you go. And we started looking through it, and I will go back to what Admiral Killian said in his previous session. This is not a construction project. Well, never will be a construction project. This is a logistics project, and it has construction elements to it. The good thing for us was we had just come off of our job out at Ascension Island where we did a full depth repair on Ascension. Anybody know where Ascension is? Opposite ocean, South America, Africa, 5x9 island. Sounds kind of familiar, right? So we had a lot of lessons learned coming out of that one. But when you get down to this one, we're essentially an asphalt provider for Red Horse, right? That's what's going to happen at the end of the day, right? My product is produce the asphalt, about 630,000 tons, originally over a 5-year period. Now it's going to be about over a 3-year period as we're moving along here. But we're just providing that service. Construction is a service. But what's all the stuff that goes behind that? And that's where we're running in, where we will all run into challenges out here. Jones Act, U.S. flag shipping. I mean, I think we had gotten the award, and within 8 days, I had to notify the government, hey, the equipment set that we're pulling out of Turkey, well, guess what? It can't go through the Red Sea right now because Red Sea is getting shot at by the Houthis. That just created a roughly $5 million change because they had to go the long way through the Panama Canal to get it there. So these are the things that we have started, that we had to look at pretty hard. Everything from biosecurity, and you will never be surprised the number of people who come out of the woodwork who want to charge to your job to do an inspection, right? When it never happened that way before, 17 people showed up and want to inspect your cargo coming off the boat, right? So those are the types of things that we were, and what I got to say is that the government did a great job of putting the right type of contract out, putting the right risk profile on this one because they knew at the outset this was going to be a risky job, and it's on both sides. So it's been very important for us as we team with the PACAF staff and the AFCAC staff out at Tyndall to make sure that we're getting this right. So we meet every week without fail. We talk about what the issues are. I mean, the current issue du jour is permits, right? So that we're dealing with those types of things, and we're trying to help out each other out as we move forward. But the contract type was correct. It's a cost reimbursable contract, right? Everybody recognizes where the risk lies, but we work through those problems as we get through that. So as we start to transition to full operations, I know James Bailey is my PM out there. He was actually my deputy at Ascension, so he's got one of these under the belt. So he's going to be working with the Red Horse the team to do the scheduling, make sure we know when we have to be producing that asphalt, what the rates are going to be, and when we pour it into that paver, it's the right stuff. There it is.
Yeah, right on. I appreciate that, and I appreciate one of the big things for us out there was the partnership between all of our organizations. So My name's Soren Hoffman. I'm with 513th Expeditionary Red Horse Squadron. I just got back from the deployment. We did 6 months out there on Tinian, and a lot of what the work looked like getting out there, we're talking about rehabilitation for us at this stage, was pushing those permits to allow Fluor to mobilize so that they can set up the asphalt batch plant to support us. But in the meantime, the jungle had almost completely taken over all of Northfield. So using the LiDAR data from Peter's team and using it to show the left and right bounds of where we can clear, where we can't clear, working with Joint Region Marianas to determine how do we preserve the natural resources, the birds, natural species there, cultural resources. It's a national historic landmark, and the people of Tinian take it very seriously that they have this preserved for future so that they can continue bringing tourism to their island. It's a major source of income for their economy. So that was one of the big things for our entire team was how do we build that trust, prioritize partnership within the government. So that was probably the first way we did that. It was within the Seabees that were on there on island and with our team, and they had some Marines there as well. We looked for every opportunity we could to partner, get them out on the project. We did, we paved over a 5-mile stretch out there on Tinian. The Broadway Avenue was the first time that we had paved that road since the Seabees were out there 80 years ago. So getting opportunities like that where our sister services and I could partner together, that was a huge part of our effort. With the PACAF, the Det1 team, using LiDAR data to put together a design that is executable by Red Horse. It's also a huge area of prioritization. The second area was with industry. So already talked about how we're using the LiDAR data from Peter's team. The geotech data, so one of the funny things with that is having to deal with the permits and getting approvals. Ryan's team didn't have the permits to dig, but our team did. So we could do the work hand in hand while they're evaluating, taking those soil samples. Our team's using the excavator, operating under the existing permits. So finding creative ways where we could work together, meet the CNMI's regulations, but also get the mission done, get the right data early on in the process so we don't have to replan things. Definitely a huge part of the effort. And then also partnering with Fluor, knowing how there are delays with the permits and getting approvals. How can we push the needle forward or get ahead of the mix design for the asphalt with Tiger Brand, and just ways we can work together and collaborate. And then finally, the third area was with the CNMI in particular. How do we be good partners? What we told our team on ground was that every single airman is an ambassador for the United States and our country and the military and the DoD. The island's only 3,000 people, which means that, hey, everybody either knows the mayor or is related to somebody who works in government. It could be the person at the rental vehicle place, and then they're cousins with the person that works at the restaurant, the 2 restaurants on island. So yeah, it's a pretty small island. So we definitely instilled that in our team, letting them know that every single airman is an ambassador for the Air Force, for the DoD, and how do we build that trust with the community and partner with the CNMI. So here are a couple photos from what we did. We paved that stretch of road up Broadway Avenue. The team did a fantastic job. We had Seabees and Marines on that project with us. In addition to, Red Horse was out there. We also brought out Prime Beef as well. So partnering in every way we could, and with FPA Pacific Corps, which was the local quarry there. We had Ryan's team out there. We were doing the test pits, clearing the keyholes, making sure we got all of the data we needed to execute this project and make good engineering decisions for logistics, getting the right material in advance. And then just, you can see the whole process of we clear the jungle, we have to create these piles, and we burn it and dispose of it in a clean manner that meets the CNMI's environmental regulations for emissions. So super awesome project. I'm super glad to be a part of it. It's definitely one of the first of its kind. Engineers leading the way. Back in 80 years ago, they were doing it, and today it's exactly the same. So it's just been fantastic to be a part of. And I'll turn it over to Colonel Osborne if you got any closing comments or anything you like to add.
Yeah, as you kind of heard, engineering kill chain right here when you see these gentlemen up here, from planning, programming, design, and the construction piece, how we can shorten that time frame to actually deliver a combat projection platform for that warfighter in this case, Air Component Commander under Indo-Pacom. Obviously, you look at, when you study Google into, they say the strongest thing in nature is a triangle that's out there. So you kind of look at three things to get after. You got requirements, you got constraints, and obviously you have the stakeholders involved. And you kind of heard definitely a lot of hands involved, and none of this can be done alone. It's a team effort to get after this, but in the end, we got to get things set in the Indo-Pacific environment. Along those lines then too, we're kind of tapping into similar to what was done on China Lake and then on San Clemente Island when they first tested this, and as Admiral Killian mentioned this morning, looks like there's a few other spots that they're using the CBs in Papua New Guinea and a few of the other islands that try to get industry and CBs together. But it's a whole of engineering approach that requires not only contractors and Department of Defense, can we get Department and State involved? Initially, we were pushing USAID to see how we can actually help on the outside of the fence. And of course, then USAID kind of turned upside down. So we kind of lost all that momentum that was going in there because again, we can do everything we can inside the fence, but if the power to the substations and other things getting up to the fence line is not there, then we're just pushing the logjam further down the road. But in the end too, we never talk much about our allies and partners, but that's kind of critical too because we're going into their sovereign countries out there. We're not here to take over their countries where they have existing agreements. CNMI and Guam's a U.S. territory. When I got Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, there's a COFA states. When you get into the Philippines, they have what they call the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreements, the ETCA sites, that are 9 agreed upon air bases and ports that actually we are allowed to actually do construction on. And Australia is a whole new beast there as we work hand in hand to try to figure things that are out there. But in the end, all those together, and we're cracking the code, what is in the realm of possible. I think the next big project as we get down to Australia, we're seeing, can we look closely with the Australian engineers that are down in the Air Force? We're bringing the CBs inside there. Can we team with industry in Australia to have 3 or 4 folks get after the same project? And what does that look like? Can it be a government-owned, government-operated, or a contractor-owned, government-operated, COCO, GO-GO? You know, can the government bite down the risk? Say we take on the logistics and use DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, to get stuff there. Can I initially get the base course laid down, then I turn it over to a contract? Many different ways to kind of skin the cat as you kind of think about how can we team together to move faster. So last week, I brought in, much like Admiral Killian honed in on the GCS MAC contract to get after his WARP project that he's been working on. In the Air Force, we leaned on AFCEC, the Air Force Civil Engineer Center, CX Readiness Directorate. And we basically tapped into the AFCAP contract, the Air Force Contracting and Augmentation Program. AFCAP 5 specifically. We brought in those 6 contractors last week to hold a basic weaponizing construction in the Indo-Pacific, a working group. Over those 3 days, we looked at it from this aspect. We looked at it from this aspect. We turned it upside down. We broke out to working groups. And as we listened to industry talk, who has experience that a lot of folks in the Department of Defense don't understand, like Captain Soren Hoffman and myself, you know, that just don't, just out of ignorance, does not know what happens on the other side. We came up with a bunch of ideas and actionable items that I think can actually break down barriers and challenges. And these are just some of the many things that we came up with that Mr. Sloop had talked about, you know, with the Cargo Preference Act, the Jones Act, the Buy America Act, things along those lines that I think we can chip away because as a Department of Defense, I can go after legislative proposals and push things up through Congress on this side of the fence. So what we plan on doing, this was the initial thing here. We plan on holding another one coming up this spring, probably in conjunction with the Pacific Industry Forum, the new Indo-Pacific SAMI event that'll happen in Honolulu, to actually then come up with actionable items that now myself, working closely with Admiral Killian, NAVFAC, over the next 3 months, what can we come back with to actually have more deliverables to move out faster? And we'll tee up an opportunity for SAMI through the Warfighter Community of Interest to see if they'd be willing to maybe take this on to work this over the next year through their multiple groups, and maybe hopefully by next year, the same time in JETC, we can have a culminating event where we actually make deliverables out there that we, as good Americans, whether in the DoD or on the private sector, can actually get and knock things out. So with that being said, I'm going to end it here. I got a 5-minute video here, a 6-minute video to kind of show you as we wrap things up. A documentary that we did on Tinian that kind of captures that engineering kill chain that sees what the individuals did, starting with Woolport and Booz Allen and Kimberly Horn and Floor, and lead it to the warfighter, the 513th Red Horse, now Soren, who's part of the 820th, on how he's delivering that combat projection platform for Admiral Paparo, who's the Indo-Pacom commander.
Final United Nations victory has been won. The war is over.
It's got to be one of the most historic bases on all of the Air Force. We faked the landing at the southern beaches. They were able to take over Tinian in only 8 days. That drew the Japanese south. They didn't expect it all.
Tinian was the largest airfield here in the Pacific, and it was built so very quickly in order to prosecute the war.
Where we are here is the final step of the Manhattan Project, to build the atomic bombs in World War II.
You can read about it in a textbook, but until you actually see it with your own eyes, it becomes a lot more real.
This is a very pivotal time in history. We're looking back at the past and rebuilding these old airfields to possibly be used in the future.
I like to say very frequently, like, we're going back to the future. As part of our Agile Combat Employment, we have taken a look at all of the historic airfields within the Pacific that helped to launch and execute successful campaigns. Building new is not the way to go, and it's very expensive. Repairing and rehabilitating what exists is a much better economic solution.
My name is Jeffrey Meyer. I'm the 36th Wing historian. My job here is to collect the history of the base as it's happening. So these are different B-29s here. This one here is actually one from the 9th Bomb Group that flew from Tinian. After Pearl Harbor, this whole area was under Japan's control. And Saipan was the center of the communications for the Japanese forces. Guam was the supermarket of the Pacific. Taking these islands was definitely to get the B-29 superfortress within round-trip range of mainland Japan. Where Northfield is today, that field only had like a 4,000-foot runway and a big tarmac. It was basically just a Japanese fighter base for one-engine airplanes. Aircraft started arriving there in January of 1945. There was enough room to put 265 aircraft, and they had the 4 runways, 8,500 by 150, and then flew their first combat mission over Japan in February of 1945.
The battle for Tinian took about a week, but less than 3 days later, even as fighting was still going on, engineers were building this airfield. Not many people come here to visit. It's a difficult journey, hard to reach, but it's still one of the most important battlegrounds and battle sites of the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. military. I invite you to spend the next 10, 15 minutes walking around the bomb pits and taking the area in.
The atomic bomb Little Boy was brought over by the USS Indianapolis. It was dropped off, put together.
Once the devices were fully assembled, they were stored in these 2 pits.
Basically, they backed the B-29 up over the hole, and then they would lift it up inside. And they didn't want to arm it till after it was off the ground.
They had a significant amount of authority on the island. They were able to redirect work, material, whatever they needed had to be provided.
And then it was loaded up on the Enola Gay on the 5th or 6th of August, 1945. Colonel Tibbets took off and they dropped the bomb.
This secret, isolated, protected site was the most important part of Tinian Island.
They pretty much shut down all of Tinian Saipan's operations 1946, and then only what became Anderson Air Force Base was opened after 1949.
So obviously when the end of World War II, they pulled everything out because obviously our focus was starting to change. We've come back here to Tinian to rehabilitate it back to what it originally was. We're not coming in and building up, we're actually tearing down and building back up. So it's not considered new construction, it's considered restoration.
It took 100,000 CBs back in 1945 to build all 4 runways, taxiways, and the ramps. Our team is trying to uncover all 4 of those taxiways, the ramps, and the runways.
I look forward to having Red Horse engineers and our CBs working jointly on that airfield to bring it back to the capability that it had back in the 1940s.
So Tinian right now, I'm rocking about a 23 personnel team. This is a huge scale. I mean, we're talking, it's like 500 acres this area is, and they have the opportunity to come in. They run all the heavy equipment. You can't beat it. This is every dirt boy's dream.
First engineering-wide Red Horse unit in the Indo-Pacific since World War II, 80 years.
Because it's a National Historic Landmark, we work very, very closely with our partners in the Joint Region Marianas and the CNMI Historic Preservation Office. Our undertaking is consistent with their responsibilities to maintain this landmark.
If we were starting from scratch, you're just able to just tear through the ground. But here, we're trying to preserve the existing pavement as we're clearing.
Being that we can rehabilitate this, start landing multiple aircraft on here, and to do future joint exercises is pivotal to the future of this region.
Our goal is to be in peace and to be able to successfully execute construction while in this peacetime environment. It puts everything back into the realm of can-do. The rehabilitation of Tinian Northfield is hard to do, and we're going to get it done. We are on the right track with bringing all of this engineering capability into the theater. It demonstrates joint solutions in joint environments. What a better place to be able to do something like this than on Tinian Northfield.
So in World War II, 117,000 engineers, a lot that came from the civilian sector, actually joined the military. It was a whole of government battle that we got into. Basically came together and fought in the Indo-Pacific. You know, as Admiral Aquilino, the previous Indo-PACOM commander, says, we have to seize the initiatives. Admiral Paro says, now onward to prevail. There's something here. Whether we got this right, who knows? But we're failing fast. We do lessons learned, and let's take what we're learning on Tinian as our first case example as we move on to the next island, which will most likely probably be in the Palau, archipelago out there, maybe in Pelew. But we got about 1 to 2 years, 3 years to plan for that one there. So let's move it to the next level, watch Tinian, but we can't rest on our laurels. We got to keep moving forward. So again, thanks for listening. Time is up. Obviously, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask the panel any questions on their specific backgrounds. If not, please feel free to leave. So open to the floor.